Many centuries ago, our great literary friend Ovid wrote the Metamorphoses, was exiled by the Emperor Augustus, and passed away in what is now modern-day Romania. Coming off the greatest literary experience of my life, which was Ovid's Metamorphoses, The Forest of the Hanged by Liviu Rebreanu had many challenges to become a book that particularly moved me, and it did. I will say, though, that when it comes to Romanian literature, it doesn't get much more cheerful than this. Looking at the works of Mircea Cartarescu, for example, a bit more modern. I do want to read Solenoid at some point, which I have here, but I want to do that when I'm not putting pressure on myself to read a book from every country. It's a bit of a brick, and there are good things, you know, about having pressure on yourself to read books, for whether that be for a research project or just a fun YouTube project like I'm doing, whatever it is. And there's also great things about taking your time with like the great books, great classics, which I have done in this project as well, like Don Quixote and Metamorphoses, Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. I took my time reading those kinds of books too. So, but The Forest of the Hanged is one you can get through pretty quick. It is, right away I want to say, dedicated to the author's brother and based on his life. In memory of my brother Emil, executed by the Austro-Hungarians on the Romanian front in the year 1917. This takes place during World War I. And it was published, you know, shortly after in the early 1920s and is considered a great classic of the Romanian literature. And we start out following a character named Apostol Bologa, who is a soldier, a lieutenant in the Austro-Hungarian army, but he's culturally and ethnically Romanian. And he starts out on the Russian front. He's part of a court-martial, a group of people who are trying a deserter, and is one of those who finds guilty. And so this deserter is promptly hanged, and there is a description, a harrowing description of the dead man's eyes. And throughout the book we are going to get sort of references to these eyes, and Apostol Bologa's conscience is deeply disturbed by this, because he, as a young man, is in the fervor of nationalist spirit and in the mindset of sacrificing all for country is the greatest good. And this is somebody who we start to get his backstory in the first few chapters, and really, even though in the first chapter it's tempting to write him off as just this sort of brainwashed and cold-hearted young man, but it becomes clear as we go on the events that led up to this that are entirely relatable, and that the explanations for human behavior are sometimes much more simple and mysterious at the same time. Like, he practically joined the army on a whim to impress the girl that he becomes engaged to, Martha. And yeah, so this book, while on the surface it's a novel about a soldier and a war novel, it's really about some kind of deeper things under the surface, the psychology of the young man in this situation, and the questions of conscience and religion, and how does for me it brings out all of the young men that served in World War I and makes them not just numbers. This to me represents, you know, possibly millions of tragedies and situations that people just like you and me have gone through in their life and had to find meaning in. And that can be a bit frightening if you really put yourself in that situation. The desperate as toward in the beginning of this book, Apostol Baloga is not a very religious man, for example, even though he was as a child. And it talks about how, he deviated away from religion after his father passed away and went to university, and he got sort of a more secular outlook on life and education, and really was interested in philosophy before he went off to join a war based on his sort of wanting to impress his fiancée. He felt insecure about her going off with the soldiers and flirting with the soldiers even while he was getting to know her. So it was a young person's insecurity that drove him to enlist in the first place, and I think that point is very important as we go throughout the book, because for all the sort of philosophical ways you want to approach war and really anything in life, at the end of the day, we're all kind of just humans acting on our emotions, and sometimes make really big decisions in life that impact our entire life with no real planning or foresight, and there's almost nothing more relatable than that. And so there's a lot I could talk about in this book. In some ways, I feel like the less I say, the better. But this, again, if you're not convinced by that, this is a Romanian classic that takes a deep look into the psychology of an individual soldier in warfare, and you can go deeper than that. An individual soldier in warfare that has cultural conflicts between his ethnic origin and his nationality. Fantastic book, and the self-conscious, the problems of conscience that he feels about things he is pretty much forced to be involved in during the war, and with, of course, some love story on the side. He falls in love also with a Romanian peasant when he's on the Romanian front, which causes some conflict between in his heart between this woman and the woman he is engaged to, that he went to war to impress but hasn't seen in some time. So one thing I want to say about the translation, this is from the Center for Romanian Studies, this edition, and it is illustrated by, let's see, Phoebe Cho, I think it was, and with translation by Eugenia Farka. So the illustrations are nice. The translation is, for the most part, good, but it's I'm just showing some of the images in here to give you an idea of the art style. There's a lot of them, probably 20 or 30 drawings in here. So the translation is good for the most part, and I don't want to be too harsh here, but I did notice a lot of typos and things that didn't quite fully make sense in English. Like, I could figure out what it was trying to say, but it wasn't correct. So like 10 to 15 typos maybe throughout the book that jumped out at me. Again, I'm just happy that classics from countries that don't generally get translated into English are being translated, so I'm not going to say that ruins this book or ruins the translation, but if you have read other translations that are a bit older, this is, I believe, the newest of all the translations. There are at least 2 more floating out there. Let me know if you've read those or picked them up and what you think of them. I'm curious if you really enjoy another translation. And it would be good for somebody coming to this video and interested in this book to know as well. So there's a lot of there's things I want to talk about in the book. I guess it's a bit more spoily because there's kind of intense conversations about God and the meaning of life and death, and the meaning of faith is a big one as well, and how faith, as the book goes on. Again, I encourage you to read this if you want to kind of experience these sorts of philosophical spoilers for yourself. But as Apostle goes on, he has conversations with his friends in the military, some priests, Often, yeah, about philosophy and faith. There are even sort of some moments where he attacks the very notion of reading itself, much like a little bit that I read in Solenoid by Cartarescu here. So that's something that connects these two Romanian novels, even though I've barely touched Solenoid, but I did read that part, a little bit of the beginning. The other soldiers, like Klapka and so on, they're important characters, and you'll get to know them. But yeah, I was talking about the attacks on reading itself. I kind of like this sort of thing, because it brings into focus the very medium that we're experiencing and makes you step outside the medium and remember that the pure experience of life is really that there is always a gap between what you're reading and the pure experience of life. So what's going on in your imagination is always kind of just a dream. What we read are dreams, memories and dreams. And this is brought really into focus by a lot of the conversations in this book. There's a real psychological element to it. Unfortunately, I'm failing to find any parts. I didn't mark them or anything like that. But yeah, sometimes it's better that the struggles that you have with the book just stay in your head until you're ready to express them. So maybe I am just going to step by. But there is this one, since I happened to just come across it, conversation really actually in the last 2/3 of the book, between Beloga and another officer named Gross. Actually, before that, I want to mention a symbolic part, a part that I thought was really interesting and thought possibly symbolic that happens earlier in the book, is Beloga actually tries, because he's trying to not be sent to the Romanian front, he's on the Russian front and knows that he's soon going to be sent to fight his own countrymen. He tries to perform an act of bravery. There's a searchlight from the Russians that they've been shooting at with artillery. He's in an artillery division, so they've been shooting at it with artillery for days, and he decides to go on his own and try to destroy it so that he can get sent away. And this was actually one of the most captivating parts of the early book. The book, on the philosophical and religious and psychological side, takes a little bit of time to get going. Like, you have to get through, I think, the first third of the book before it gets really psychologically and philosophically interesting. But it's not a hard book to get through by any means, and even the events in the first part of the book do feel like they're always pushing the story forward and always leading to something. So, I never felt bogged down or anything like that. It's a really, I think, tightly written book in that sense, and opens up a bit towards the end. But this conversation between Beloga and Gross, he says, "All past and future scientific systems shall not smother God's voice in man's heart. You come up against puzzled questioning everywhere. In God alone may you find peace beyond doubt. If there's no God in your soul, you're constantly worrying about the sense of life, and you can never tell the good from the bad, for what was right one day may turn out to be wrong the next day. The moment God should abandon man for good, hopeless, the world will turn into an immense mechanism deprived of a guiding force, doomed to endless, pointless grating, frightfully pointless. In such a world, life would be so horrible a torment that no sensitive creature would be able to bear it. It would actually be the end of the world." And this is countered. "Man has been fretting for thousands of years, imploring the blessings of the God of love, and year in, year out, things have been going from bad to worse, because love is the dowry of the faint-hearted and of the hopeless. The martyrs for the sake of Christ face death, glorifying God of love. Yet God, however, the victory of Christianity was obtained by humiliation and cowardice, therefore enthroning the rule of falseness, hypocrisy, and injustice. The God of love has killed more people than all the other gods combined. An apostle responds, Love never killed man. Love never killed man, apostle said unshaken. It's only men who are killing in the name of love. Yet when the real rule of love comes... Ellipses. And this is, the use of ellipses here is really interesting because I remembered a note to the Lithuanian novel that I read, Tula, where the translator said that in many cases she omitted the use of ellipses because it was confusing to the reader and didn't quite work in English. This book, I don't know if Romanian is at all similar to Lithuanian, not at all, but I'm wondering, because I'm not a linguist and I have very little linguistic knowledge, but I'm wondering if there was a similar choice here where the author actually tried to work in a lot of those ellipses and sort of kind of stopping speaking in sort of the middle of a phrase with ellipses, because there's a ton of that in here, and that makes me think there's something linguistic about Romanian where that is used that's similar, or at least there was a similar choice made there. So feel free to comment on that if you are familiar with those languages. I'm curious. But that aside, yeah, a really wonderful book. And that conversation actually reminded me, one of the things I was thinking about while reading this was the didactic nature of books of the past. And I've heard it's definitely a didactic, there are didactic conversations in this book where two characters are presenting the arguments for God, for faith, for country, and there's no real absolute conclusion, but it's kind of left to the reader to find what is the truth in the middle ground of that argument. I don't feel, even though I feel there's been some ideas out there that this didactic writing is somehow a thing of the past, or that we have to move beyond it, or like, yeah, communism and capitalism, right? These sort of arguing, there's actually an argument in the book that brings up how socialism is the right philosophy because it openly expresses the hatred and the anger that is the rule of life. That anger is and hatred is actually life itself. That behind all love, all good, all posturing of God and good morals and things like that, there lies a hatred that is really the root of life, and that socialism simply is honest about that and expresses it by pitting one class against another. That's what a character says, okay? So that's not necessarily the author's view, and it's not my view. It's it's what a character says, and this is also and this is put up against Baloga's sort of faith and his idea that it's better that in this world, basically the only thing beyond death is the dreams that we have. Like life, the only thing that we can use to defend ourselves from the terror of non-existence is the dreams that we create. And that this has to be done through faith and love and God. And so yeah, at one point in this book, Apostle Baloga really takes faith in God to be his only defense against the horrible situations in which he is, his sort of unlucky lot in life, and seeing the terrible nature of war and crime and punishment in the court-martials around him. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but yeah, I think I'll leave it there. This was a really great book. I recommend it if you're even the least bit interested. Classic of Romanian literature, as I say again. Oh, I didn't really finish my thought on the didactic thing. Yeah, I don't think we've really moved beyond that in the modern age. I still think that didactic conversations are great to use in literature and very productive to have with people, and being able to just in the same way as we should be able to step back while reading a book and question what is the value of books and reading itself, because our experience of life is here. It's not in the book. Though you could argue that the book, changes your experience of life, but is that a good or a bad thing? In the same way, we should be able to have didactic conversations where we present two different arguments that we don't, and maybe take an argument that we don't necessarily believe just to test it out. That's what I'm doing in many of my videos, is trying to form an argument that I express sometimes on this video, and taken out of context could probably make it look like that's what I believe, but I'm often experimenting with ideas, and that's an idea, of course, expressed a lot in Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, looked down upon a bit by Settembrini, but I actually think it's one of the only ways that young people, well, we're all young people in the end. You know, we don't live that terribly long that we figure out all the mysteries of the universe. But I think it's really the only one of the best ways we have to figure things out. You can also take the approach of Ovid and just have this, and just tell stories. Just tell stories based on myths, destroy them, or reinvent them, and do whatever you want, and just take creative freedom to your work. Or but it's not like he was completely inventing things. He was working with stuff that was already there and using it in sometimes intentionally controversial ways. So I found myself thinking about all these different approaches to life and art, and what is the meaning of reading even? What's the point of reading all these books and being this expert on philosophy, when at the end of the day, maybe it's just faith in a beautiful dream that gets us through and walks us into the great beyond. So with that, I'll leave you, and I hope you have a nice evening, day, night, whatever. We'll see you next time.